Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink, it is time for some PathOfExile discussion. Patch 3.19 definitely didn't go down very well with the PathOfExile player base. And whilst I'm more positive about the current state of the game than I think a lot of people are, I wanted to do a video about something that really grinds my gears about the current state of the endgame, and that is sextants and micromanagement of mapping in general. It may be interesting to see that this is about changes that were made in 3.17. This is not about 3.19 changes. It's something that seemed to work pretty well for a few months, but then the more and more that we played with the system, the more that its flaws started becoming apparent and the more annoying it started to become. In many ways, the more that the player base learnt to optimize this system, the more that we managed to optimize all of the fun out of the system. And that's where I think we are now. So let's talk about why sextants are in such an annoying way. One thing you'll notice in the background is that I have the Forbidden Trove trade Discord open. There's a whole bunch of people who are selling pre-rolled sextants. They're doing this in bulk and in very large numbers. You'll see that some people here have things like 200 copies of the same sextant. You'll see here that there's 200 copies of Attract Monsters from Beyond, 200 copies of 2 additional strongboxes and they're corrupted and rare, and there's a whole bunch of other people with very large stacks of sextants for sale as well. This has been something that's been going on all of 3.17, 18 and 19, except maybe for the first few days of each of those leagues. In short, there is a very, very large amount of sextant trading going on. There's a couple of reasons for this. The first reason is that the mod Enduring Influence on the Atlas passive tree really incentivizes you to do all of your sextant rolling at once. It's actually not just Enduring Influence existing, it is the ability to sextant block as well. These two factors combine to make it so that it is simply far, far, far more efficient to do all of your sextant rolling at once, or if you are unwilling to do that, to essentially outsource it to someone else who's willing to take over doing one of the not very fun parts of the game for you in exchange for you paying them a bunch of currency to do so. And that's fundamentally what TFT organizes here. TFT connects people who want to have fun playing the game, not having to roll their own sextants. It finds those people and it connects them to people who are willing to put up with the tedium that is batch rolling sextants for a long period of time, and then facilitates an exchange between them. This would probably happen to some extent even if Enduring Influence and sextant blocking didn't exist, but those two factors make it considerably worse because they actively discourage players from using sextants in any way other than batch rolling them. But I don't think it's just these two factors that cause people to feel compelled to either engage in sextant trading or alternately to feel like they're missing out on loot. It is something else as well, and that is the hyperspecialization of sextants. And this I think is something that really got stuffed up in 3.17 and is something that should be rethought pretty urgently. There are a number of very rare sextants. So this here is the list on the website POE, which data mines a whole bunch of information from the game files. This is a list of all the possible sextants that can roll using an awakened sextant. There is also another list for elevated sextants, and it's pretty similar, but there are a few notable differences. Now this has information about how rare they are, so some of the really common ones are weighted 1,000, then there's ones that are weighted 500, those are twice as rare. Then there's ones that are 250, those are 4 times as rare as the thousands. Then there's some that are 50. There's also a few other numbers as well. There's some that are 125, and there's one which is purely for meme value, which is 10. Really for each of these sextant modifiers, there are two ways that you can use them. You can either use them what I term casually, which means you don't fundamentally change your mapping process in order to match the sextant that you've got, or you can use them in what I might term a min-maxed way. In this situation, you will then look to find ways to synergize the rest of your mapping with the sextant modifiers that you've got. So for example, if you have Final Map Boss in each map drops an additional Conqueror map as a sextant mod, the casual way to do this is to run the map, to kill the map boss, and to loot your Conqueror map. The min-max way to do this is to stack as much map duplication chance as you can get from the Atlas passive tree, and also from Eldritch Altars, and then try to run the map and get 2 Conqueror maps instead of 1. There is, of course, a cost to doing this. You need to respec your entire atlas into a Wandering Path atlas every time you get this sextant, or alternately, do the efficient thing and sell this sextant to someone that can use it better than you can because they maintain a permanent Wandering Path atlas. Now, some things are easy to min-max. A good example of that is this sextant. Items found in your identified maps are identified, and 20% increased pack size in your unidentified maps. Here, anyone that's varling maps will generally be able to get 4 maps that they can save up that are unidentified and put those ones aside, and then they can batch run them when they get this sextant. That's something you can do that is min-maxing around it, and that's easy to do. But there's a number of sextant mods that were added recently that are very hard to min-max around. So I want to take one example of this, and that is breaches in your maps belong to Chayula and contain 3 additional clasped hands. Now this Sextant mod currently sells for only about 20 chaos. At various points in the league, I think it was a bit higher than that. However, this is pretty much completely useless unless you are running a breach-oriented atlas, and you also go as far as to use at least a polished and ideally a gilded breach scarab on every map. However, you will do even better again if you're doing this with maps that have an implicit on them that the area contains additional breaches. Essentially, if you are casually rolling maps and you happen to come across this Sextant, you have basically no use for it. You can either run it and then just be disappointed when it does almost nothing, or you can seal it and potentially sell it. But the people who are interested in buying these are only going to be interested in buying it if you've got a fair amount of bulk that's worth their time. And that ends up being the other problem here. Casual use of Sextants, when you get a good mod, chances are you don't have enduring influence, so you're only getting 3/4 of the value, and then you're forced to sell it for lower because you don't have bulk. And that's one of the things that I really hate about the current Sextant system. There's a lot of other ones that are actually even worse than that Chayula one. Create a copy of beasts captured in your maps is a really extreme effect, but that again does absolutely nothing for people that aren't invested heavily in Einhar. Your maps contain 100% increased number of runic monster markers. This is quite a rare Sextant, and it does absolutely nothing at all unless you're forcing there to be expeditions on your maps, which requires the use of scarabs. Legion splinters and emblems are duplicated, completely useless unless you have a fairly heavy investment in Legion on your maps, and so on and so forth. There's a whole bunch of these, and I really don't think that they're healthy for the game at the moment. Whilst it's pretty clear that the intended use case for that rare Legion one that we looked at before was using it alongside the other Sextant, your maps contain an additional Legion encounter, it's definitely not going to be the case for someone that is casually rolling Sextants, that every time they have that other one appear, that they're going to have this one to use, or they're going to have appropriate scarabs to use and the like. Ultimately, what we're seeing with Sextants at the moment is a system of gameplay that encourages players to trade more, otherwise they lose out on some of the value of some of the consumables they're getting. And that's a real problem because trading in this game tends to be a very frustrating experience. Even when you're dealing with people who are completely honest, those people will sometimes be in the middle of content that is hard to leave, or there'll be all sorts of other barriers that will come up that will render it more difficult for you to trade with them effectively. And that's what's really annoying about Sextants. There is just simply too much micromanagement with mapping at the moment. And I would rather see Sextants completely and utterly overhauled so that we don't have any more of this rubbish feeling like it's an essential part of the game, and so that we can go back to running maps and doing the fun parts of the game rather than spending our time micromanaging and trading or batch rolling Sextants, which is one of the most boring things you'll ever do in this game, even if it is very lucrative. That's all I've got. May your elevated Sextants be more entertaining than mine ever are.